always do it on my own, so I gotta get through it. And the only thing I know is to love what I'm.
Once there was a young woman named Emily, who had always been fascinated by the supernatural. She loved to read ghost stories and watch horror movies, and she even dabbled in a little bit of amateur ghost hunting with her friends. One day, Emily and her friends decided to explore an old abandoned mansion on the outskirts of town. The mansion was said to be haunted, and the locals avoided it at all costs. But Emily and her friends were brave, or foolish, enough to venture inside. As they explored the mansion, they heard strange noises and saw shadows moving in the corners of their eyes. Emily thought it was all just their imaginations running wild, until they stumbled upon a room in the basement that sent chills down their spines. The room was filled with arcane symbols etched into the walls and floor. In the center of the room, there was a strange object that looked like a crystal ball. Emily reached out to touch it, and the moment she did, the world around her disappeared. When she opened her eyes again, she found herself in a strange, dimly lit room. There were strange machines and instruments all around her, and she could hear a low humming sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Emily soon realized that she was not alone. In the shadows, she could see dark, twisted figures moving about, whispering in a language she could not understand. Emily tried to scream, but her voice was trapped in her throat. As she tried to make sense of her surroundings, Emily realized that she was not in her own world anymore. She had been transported to another realm, a place where the laws of physics and reality did not apply. Emily tried to find a way out, but every door she opened led to another room, filled with more strange machinery and terrifying creatures. She soon realized that she was trapped in this nightmare realm, and there was no escape. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Emily lost track of time, living in a never-ending cycle of fear and despair. The creatures that haunted her dreams seemed to know her every move, always lurking in the shadows, waiting for their chance to strike. But Emily refused to give up. She studied the strange machines and symbols, trying to find a way to reverse whatever spell had brought her here. She spent hours meditating and focusing her mind, trying to tap into whatever power she had left. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Emily found what she was looking for. She discovered a strange, glowing crystal that seemed to radiate with a powerful energy. She knew that this crystal was the key to her escape. With all the strength she could muster, Emily used the crystal to focus her power, channeling it into a spell that would send her back to her own world. The spell was risky, and Emily knew that there was a chance she might not survive. But she had no other choice. As she chanted the incantation, Emily felt a surge of energy coursing through her veins. The world around her started to shimmer and twist, and she could feel herself being pulled back to her own reality. When Emily opened her eyes again, she was back in the abandoned mansion, surrounded by her friends. They had been looking for her for hours, and had just found her lying unconscious on the floor of the basement. Emily was overjoyed to be back in her own world, but she knew that she had been forever changed by her experience. She had seen things that no human should ever see, and had felt the power of the supernatural coursing through her veins. From that day forward, Emily dedicated herself to the study of the supernatural, becoming one of the world's leading experts on the paranormal. She never forgot her experience in the nightmare realm. Once upon a time, there was a small town nestled deep in the heart of the forest. The townspeople were a friendly bunch, always happy to lend a hand to their neighbors and welcome visitors with open arms. But there was something lurking in the woods that they didn't talk about, something that kept them up at night and made them lock their doors tight. It started with strange noises in the middle of the night, rustling in the bushes and footsteps outside people's homes. Some folks reported seeing strange shapes moving in the shadows, but when they investigated, there was nothing there. As the days went by, the incidents became more frequent and more unnerving. People started to see things they couldn't explain, like a figure in a hooded cloak watching them from the edge of the woods. At first, the townspeople tried to dismiss it as their imaginations running wild. But soon, they couldn't ignore the feeling of being watched or the unease that settled over the town like a thick fog. They began to arm themselves with whatever they could find, and the sheriff organized patrols to keep watch over the town at night. One day, a group of teenagers decided to venture into the woods to investigate the strange occurrences. They thought it would be fun, an adventure to tell their friends about. But they never came back. The town went into a panic, and the sheriff organized a search party to comb the forest. They found no trace of the teenagers, but what they did find chilled them to the bone. Deep in the heart of the forest, there was a clearing unlike any they had ever seen. It was surrounded by gnarled trees and thick underbrush, and in the center of the clearing stood a massive stone altar. The altar was covered in blood, and there were bones scattered around it. The townspeople realized with horror that they were dealing with something much more sinister than they had ever imagined. As the days went by, more people disappeared, and the townspeople grew more desperate. They tried everything they could think of to protect themselves, but nothing seemed to work. They even tried leaving town, but something always seemed to draw them back. It was as if the forest had a hold on them, and they were powerless to resist. The townspeople finally came to the conclusion that they were dealing with a malevolent force that they couldn't fight. They decided to make a sacrifice to appease whatever it was that was haunting them, hoping it would leave them alone. They chose a young woman, a stranger who had wandered into town just a few days before. The night of the sacrifice was the most terrifying the town had ever experienced. The townspeople gathered around the altar, holding their breath as they waited for something to happen. And then, it did. The hooded figure emerged from the shadows, a twisted smile on its face as it accepted the offering. But the sacrifice didn't satisfy the creature. It demanded more and more, until the townspeople were sacrificing someone every night. The town became a place of terror, and the townspeople were trapped in a cycle of fear and despair. They realized too late that they had made a terrible mistake, and that their actions had only made things worse. The creature that haunted the town had been awakened by their fear and their desperation, and it had grown stronger with every sacrifice. It had no intention of leaving the town alone, and it was only a matter of time before it consumed them all. And so, the town remains to this day, a place of terror and darkness that no one dares to enter. The creature still lurks in the woods, waiting for its next victim to stumble into its grasp. And the townspeople, those who remain, are forever haunted by the choices they made and the price they. Alright, here's a story that I hope meets your requirements. This story is a work of fiction and any resemblance to actual events or persons is purely coincidental. The Orphanage. The old orphanage sat at the edge of town, its decrepit walls and broken windows a stark contrast to the modern buildings that surrounded it. Legend had it that the orphanage was haunted by the spirits of the children who had died there, their tortured souls trapped within its walls. Despite the rumors, a group of teenagers decided to explore the abandoned orphanage one night. They entered through a window that had been smashed open and made their way inside. The place was eerie, with the sound of their footsteps echoing through the empty halls. As they explored further, they noticed strange markings on the walls and the floors, as if someone had tried to scratch their way out. Suddenly, they heard a faint whispering sound. At first, they thought it was just the wind, but as they listened more closely, they realized that it was the sound of children's voices. The voices grew louder and more frantic, as if the children were trying to warn them of something. The teenagers became increasingly frightened and decided to leave. But as they tried to make their way out, they found that all the doors were locked. They were trapped inside the orphanage with no way out. As the night wore on, they heard more and more strange noises. Footsteps creaked on the floorboards and the sound of doors opening and closing echoed through the halls. And then, the children's voices grew louder and more insistent, urging them to leave. But it was too late. The teenagers were trapped inside the orphanage, with no escape from the spirits that haunted it. They tried to break through the windows, but they were too high and too thick. They screamed for help, but no one came. And as the hours passed, they realized that they were not alone in the orphanage. The ghosts of the children who had died there were with them, and they were not happy. One by one, the teenagers began to disappear. They would hear a scream or a cry for help, and then the sound would fade away. And then there would be one less person in the group. The survivors huddled together, praying for the nightmare to end. But it didn't end. It went on for days and weeks, until there was only one survivor left. He was driven mad by the horror he had witnessed, and he spent the rest of his days locked up in a mental institution, screaming about the ghosts that haunted the orphanage. And the orphanage itself remained standing, a grim reminder of the terror that lurked within its walls. No one ever went inside again, and the legend of the haunted orphanage lived on for generations to come.